Right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our workshop. Tonight, we are going to be talking about how to evaluate and get the most out of a job offer, including some strategies for negotiation. Before we get started and introduce ourselves, just a few housekeeping items. This is a webinar, so everybody is muted. We can't see you. But if you do have a question, we definitely want you to ask. So please feel free to use the Q&A. This is a pretty small group so far, so we're also fine if you just want to unmute yourself and ask a question, feel free to do that. And we will have time at the end of the presentation, though, to go over any of the questions that we may have missed from the Q&A. All right, so we're just going to briefly introduce ourselves. My name is Kristen Stanton, and I'm one of the career consultants in the CPDC. I work specifically with Dietrich College undergrads and grad students.
And hi, everybody. My name is Caden Boucher. I am a career consultant as well in the CPDC, and I work in the College of Fine Arts, specifically with the non-conservatory students in art, architecture, design, and BXA.
All right, thanks, Caden.
Yeah.
All right, and not to scare you, but we have a bit of a disclaimer before we get started. We will be talking about evaluating an offer, and really our information is intended to help you generally understand the different terms and processes related to offers of employment. Please don't take this information as any sort of legal advice. Occasionally when you're signing an offer, you may be asked to sign a longer contract or a non-compete or a non-disclosure. If there's anything in your individual offer that you're not sure about, we definitely recommend that you first make an appointment with your college career consultant. And then if necessary, maybe we may advise you to seek legal counsel. Probably not, but just keep that in mind, that this is general advice and everybody's offer is pretty specific. So do make an appointment with your individual consultant if you feel like you need to follow up.
So many of you probably have either maybe heard of your upper class colleagues who have gotten job offers already, or you're just starting to get some job offers rolling in yourself. But there's a couple of ways that a job offer might actually look like and how that process might shake out. So first off, the offer is likely to arrive typically by phone via a verbal offer. Usually this will be with the recruiter that you have been speaking with throughout the recruiting process, and will basically just set you up to note you're probably going to be receiving some sort of email or snail mail letter that is actually outlining the statement of your offer. That verbal offer will also probably include a response deadline, which will usually look like a certain amount of time. Sometimes it'll look like maybe 24 hours to up to maybe a couple of months. And we'll go over a little bit later if you do end up getting one of those offers that is a 24-hour turnaround time notice. But just note that the average decision-making period is usually between 3 to 7 days. Whenever a written offer is provided, it will disclose basically a full benefit summary, as well as any type of contractual disclosures, which can include those non-disclosure agreements or things related to your benefits package that has to do with non-compete clauses. But in general, if you receive a verbal offer, your next question should always be, okay, can I have all of this information in writing? If they weren't already going to send it, they will most likely do so very soon after you have that conversation. It is important to note that you can still move forward with other interviews and applications until you have accepted an opportunity. That means that if you are currently looking for a full-time job offer, you receive an offer from one company, but you're waiting on hearing back from your favorite position possibly, then you can continue to wait on that information as long as it doesn't cut into that decision-making timeline and you have not accepted any other offers as well. So job offer processes will basically look the same across different industries, but in general, you're probably going to be looking at verbal, written, and then your ultimate acceptance or rejection, which will also need to be in writing. So for the verbal offer, within some different considerations that you'll probably need to keep in mind. There are some communication strategies that we definitely want to highlight. First off, when you're on the phone with somebody and they are giving you a verbal offer, I highly recommend that you take notes, especially regarding the nitty-gritty information around like salary information, any type of potential start dates, or anything that you would need to know for the purpose of getting yourself to a location in order to actually start. It's also recommended that if you have any questions, you are absolutely able to ask for that clarification during a verbal offer, is when a verbal offer is being offered in the first place. But definitely ask for more on a clarification basis rather than trying to be like, okay, these are all the things that I'm going to need to negotiate on later. So just make sure that that clarification is provided before you have that written offer in your hand. I will say that you can negotiate, or can you go back 1 second, Kristen? Thanks. You can negotiate on things that you are being offered in a verbal offer, but we would recommend not doing so because seeing the actual offer in writing is just going to help you make your decisions moving forward, as each aspect of a job offer is in relation to itself. But ultimately, do not accept a job position just based on a verbal offer. Get it in writing before you have confirmed anything. And once you receive that written offer, make sure that you are acknowledging that you have gotten that offer and that you are very thankful for it and you're looking forward to the opportunity, but use non-committal language until you are absolutely certain that you will accept. While a verbal offer is not an actual acceptance, some companies like to think it is. So it's better to just not use any type of committal language that you will be taking the position or you're excited to join the team. Take some time to review your offer, write down any questions or concerns that you might want to have with, or a conversation with that recruiter, and also make sure that you know whether you're going to want to have those conversations by phone or email. It's kind of recommended that we say try and set up a time to actually have a phone conversation so nothing gets taken out of context and no questions come up in regards to what was written in email. But just in general, make sure that you have those questions written down somewhere. So if you do need to send them off, they're already ready to go.
All right, great. So let's now talk about evaluating that offer. And I first just want to say that your first job may not be your dream job, and that is totally okay. Instead, you really want to ask yourself if this is a role that you can be happy in for at least a year, and if this role will prepare you for your next step or your next position. We would give this advice even before COVID times, but I think this is even more relevant now because, it is a more competitive job market, and maybe your dream job is in performance art or in travel and tourism or in one of those industries that's really been hit hard. Point being that we can't all be maybe as picky as we were 2 years ago. And so instead of thinking about, I have to get this job title at this company, maybe instead think about what skills am I hoping to develop in the next year? And how will this position enable me to move forward in my career a year or two from now? It was never the case that people stayed in their jobs forever. And I think now it's even more true that staying for a year is actually pretty good. So don't feel like you have to be in this job or that you'll be stuck in this job forever. It's just not the case. So that's just something to keep in mind. Other things to consider when you're evaluating an offer, and there are lots of different things. These are some of them. Is this organization a fit for me? Could I see myself being happy here? Do I want to be in a large company or a small company? Is this a good fit for my career? If I know that in 5 years from now, I want to be a data scientist, is this position going to help get me to that? Of course, you want to consider geography. Is this somewhere you might want to live? What is the cost of living in that city? How important is work-life balance? Is there going to be an opportunity for growth? And so sometimes what I would recommend doing is just coming up with a really basic Excel spreadsheet if you have multiple offers, where you simply rank the factors that are important to you. And you can either give each of these factors 1 point and then simply like tick off the boxes and then add up the columns. Or if location is more important to you, say, than like paid vacation, then maybe location is weighted higher. So there's lots of different ways to evaluate job offers, but it really starts with knowing yourself, understanding what you value, and then making sure that those things that are most highly valued are present in that offer. So, you know, as an example, you may get 2 offers that have the same job title. You know, maybe you have 2 offers for a project manager position, but those experiences could actually be quite different, right? So if you're evaluating employer number 1 that's in this massive company, maybe you get lots of opportunity for paid travel when we're not in a pandemic, you know, really good benefits, job security. Whereas in company number 2, it's a smaller company. And so maybe you don't get to travel as much, but you have like a really fun casual workplace, open floor plan, lots of happy hours, you know, you get to interact with the CEO. So you kind of have to, you know, weigh those things and consider which you may be happier in. Any questions before we move on? All right.
And before we kind of dive into the importance of negotiation and making sure that you are getting the compensation packages that you are worth, just note that you need to remember 3 things about negotiation. Before you negotiate, know your worth. Before you negotiate, know your privileges. And before you negotiate, know your responsibilities. What all 3 of these things align with is basically knowing yourself and the kind of work that you eventually want to do. We'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment, but overarchingly, you just want to make sure that whenever you are thinking about accepting a position that you could maybe potentially see yourself in the future, how is this going to affect who you are, what you do, and how are you going to grow personally and professionally? So just keep all of these things in mind as we move forward in talking about it. And also when you are talking with your career consultant or some other mentor, how you're approaching the negotiation cycles to make sure that you are getting what you are worth and what you deserve.
All right. So talking about knowing your worth, we do have several resources that can help you to evaluate salary, which is arguably one of the most important components in any offer. So here are certain resources that we would recommend. NerdWallet has a great cost of living calculator. You know, so if you entered the salary for Pittsburgh and you wanted to see what the equivalent might look like in New York City, it would allow you to do that. Both Glassdoor and LinkedIn have self-reported salary data. So these can be really useful if you, you know, if you're curious about what the average salary is for a certain role in a certain city. Glassdoor also has employee reviews. So if you were curious about what other former or current employees have to say about the general culture or management leadership of the company, you could check Glassdoor. The CPDC also works hard every year to collect data on all of our graduating students. So we have mean and median salary data from alumni for the last, I believe, 4 or 5 years. I'm going to show you where to find that. And then finally, Going Global is a resource that's available to all of you in Handshake. You can do a lot of different things with Going Global, including looking up jobs and city information for just about every country in the world. But you can also review H-1B sponsorship history and salary information. So what I'm going to do is pop out of the presentation real quick, and I'm going to just show you a couple of these tools. So this is LinkedIn Salary. It's just linkedin.com/salary. And let's say that I wanted to know the average salary for a data analyst. Let's go with New York. So it's really that easy. So this is going to give me the median, low and high base salary for data analysts in New York City. You can imagine, you know, there is a lot of variety here. It's probably related to company size, Also seniority, so some data analysts may have been in that position for 1 year, some may have been in that position for 3 to 4 years, but it gives you a good median, good average to work with. And then if I scroll down, you can see it even gives me more specific company data. So now I have Capital One, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Capital One data analyst salaries. I have Microsoft data analyst salaries. So this is really useful, and you can search by specific companies using LinkedIn. And then going down, it gives you the same salaries for different locations. So this is really useful information that you can use when or if you want to negotiate the salary part of your offer. I also wanted to show you the CMU outcomes. So these can be found on our homepage, cmu.edu/career. And if you just go to this outcomes tab, all right, this is going to bring up salaries and destination information. And you're going to go to the post-grad outcomes dashboard. So here, this is powered by Tableau, and it does take a second to load. But you can see that we have information from the last 4 years. I can search all 4 years, or I could select 1 or 2 of those years. I can search by degree level, by college, by department, by even as specific as major. So I'm not going to go through that now, but I'll show you, if you scroll down, this is information from all of the grads for all 4 years. But you can see the average salary is about 100K. Here's a range, and this is 5,000 salaries in this data sample. Again, this will get smaller as you filter, but this is where you can find information. And, if you are planning to negotiate, often it's helpful to know, let's say you're in the statistics and data science department. Well, the average salary for somebody who graduated in 2020 from statistics and data science is X. That can be a really useful data point to use in your conversation with recruiters, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. All right.
So before we kind of start talking a little bit more about negotiation and making sure that you know the ins and outs of how to ask for negotiation opportunities in a professional way, we do want to make sure that you know of the ethical job search policies for both students and employers who work through Carnegie Mellon. So first off, we do want to say that it is really important that whenever you are seeking any opportunities, whether that be something that you found at a career fair at Carnegie Mellon or something that is separate, you are representing the Carnegie Mellon community. So we want to encourage you that when you are looking for both internships or full-time opportunities, you're doing so in an ethical way that is coming off as both professional for yourself as well as professional for the CMU community. So that means if you are going through and you're applying to a bunch of different positions, that you are essentially signing up to make sure that you are making strong decisions in a way that is reflecting on yourself in a good way, on your department, on your major, and then also Carnegie Mellon as a whole. So what that means is we want to encourage you not to renege. So what reneging means is basically you get a position and you're like, okay, I can live with this position. I'm going to accept it and move forward with it. But then a couple of weeks later, you get an offer for an interview and then ultimately an offer from a position that you find to be way better than the one that you've already accepted. It is not okay for you to then back out of that first opportunity to accept the second opportunity that came later on. Yes, that can be really tricky to navigate, especially during the full-time job search when all of the different recruiting timelines tend to happen at different specific points. But it's just ultimately going to be a better look for you to follow up on the things that are necessary moving forward through your professional career. Now, of course, during COVID and extenuating circumstances, this isn't going to fully apply because things are a little bit wonky. And so things were a little bit different over this past year with positions being rescinded or things having to change in terms of pandemic expectations. But we do just want to, again, say Reneging is not something that is going to look good for you, and it's not going to eventually help your future colleagues at Carnegie Mellon. So if you can prevent yourself from doing that, definitely try to do so. If you have questions about your choice or your processing of going through with recruiting timelines, definitely talk to your career consultant. They could provide a little bit more information on how you can weigh the pros and cons of each of your different opportunities, and maybe how to ask for extensions on time to figure out what opportunities are going to be offered to you so you can make a fuller and more robust decision for yourself. And then on the flip side of that, we all just want to let you know that there is a very similar hiring policy for employers that work through CMU, but this also doesn't just apply to those employers that recruit at our career fairs, at info sessions, or do outreach through Handshake. So it is an expectation that employers will provide you with at least 3 weeks to make a decision on any type of offer, whether that be a short-term internship or a full-time job. So if you are going through and asking for a possible opportunity and you end up getting that opportunity, if you end up receiving a exploding offer, is what we like to call them, 24 to 48 hour turnaround time, you must give them a reason or an answer by then. That technically is not ethical on the employer's part, and you honestly don't need to be dealing with that issue. So what we would recommend doing is sending along an email with this link. You can just Google CMU CPDC hiring policy and send a link in an email stating Carnegie Mellon has this policy for employers that recruit CMU students. If it would be possible, please give me until this date. You want to give them a solid date on when you could actually let them know of your decision. If that employer is still not going along and basically allowing you to have that time to make that decision, then you can always go to your career consultant and consult with them about next steps. Some possible next steps might look like getting the career consultant involved and CCing them on an email with this information further posted or drawn out, or possibly having somebody in our employer relations team reach out to a company representative on your behalf or anonymously. So there are ways that we can protect you to make sure that you're not having to deal with these exploding offers, especially when you're dealing with the stressors of also trying to finish school. So if you ever have any questions or concerns about an offer that you have gotten, please don't hesitate to reach out to your career consultant. We can definitely help you with those next steps moving forward.
All right, great. And I'll just answer the question that was posed in the Q&A real quick before I move on. The salary information, salary data that I showed you on our website, that is all self-reported. Okay. So compensation expectations. This is a conversation that you should expect to happen, and it can really happen at any time. So sometimes in the course of an interview, you'll get asked in your very first phone screen, what are your salary expectations? Sometimes the conversation won't come up until your final round interview. But regardless, you should be prepared to answer that. So if you're being asked the question verbally, then it's, you shouldn't feel like you have to be pinned down to a specific number. I really like the idea of giving a range. So, I'd be comfortable with a salary in the range of, 50 to 65. You can say something like, well, the average starting salary for a student with my major coming out of CMU is 75K. So I'd be looking for something in that ballpark. Make sure though that you've done your research and that the numbers you're throwing out there make sense. They should be reasonable as you're looking at average salaries for similar positions using the tools that we just talked about. At the same time, you'll want to consider cost of living. So if you're interviewing with a company in the Bay Area in San Francisco, make sure you put some padding in there to cover your expenses. When you are asked, if you are asked this question on a job application before you even had a chance to talk to anybody, I recommend that you try to put in that box flexible, right? It doesn't always allow you to type in a word, but if you can, try to type in the word flexible or negotiable. If you have to put a number in that box, again, I would try to just do your research and put something in that's that you would be definitely comfortable taking if that were what was offered to you. So it shouldn't be too low, but at the same time, you don't want to put a number in there that's too high, because sometimes hiring managers will look at those salary expectations on an application, and if you're way out of the number that they've budgeted for, then they won't interview you. So you want to be thoughtful there. Once you have received an offer, you want to decide whether you want to negotiate. Okay, so you don't always have to negotiate. I've talked to students who have received really competitive and compelling offers and still feel that they should try to negotiate. You don't always have to. You also don't need to have a competing offer to negotiate. So you don't need to have two offers, but what you do need to have is some sort of data point. So if you're going to go back and ask for a higher salary, make sure you have some reason for doing that. Examples of data points could be what we've showed you: the average salaries according to Glassdoor or LinkedIn, the average starting salary according to students who graduated with your degree, the cost of living in a certain area. If you are interviewing for a position where the degree requirement was a bachelor's degree and you have a master's degree, that could be a data point that you can use in your favor. So the fact that you have more qualifications than they were asking for. But just make sure that you have some reason to negotiate. Also, don't negotiate if you don't plan on accepting the offer. This, it's very common to negotiate, and that's perfectly normal. But at the same time, when you do that, you are asking that recruiter to go back and maybe get, more permissions from leadership or management. They probably have to jump through some hoops to try to get you a higher salary. So if you have no intention of accepting, don't make them do that, because it's almost like, burning an unnecessary bridge. And then remember that once you do throw out a figure, your potential, your negotiation potential is tied to that figure. So again, be thoughtful and mindful when you're doing your research.
Kristen, this would be a good time to answer the question that just came in. Somebody asked, I have heard that some people put a number 1 into the box when asking for some sort of salary figure that doesn't allow you to type letters. What are your thoughts on doing that?
Yeah, I've heard of that too. I think it's a risk. On the one hand, they know why you're doing that, right? So the recruiter or the person reading the application, they're probably going to assume that you don't want to throw out a number. So it just depends on how many other qualified applicants they have who did give a number that was within their range. Some recruiters will say, okay, we'll get to the conversation later, not a big deal. And others may say, I'm not so sure that I even want to bother with this person, because I know that I have to hire somebody who's willing to take 50K, and I don't know that this person is willing to take 50K. I have 100 other qualified applicants, so I'm not going to bother to call this person. So it's a gamble. I've heard it turn out okay both ways. So I wish I could say like, yeah, that's definitely fine, or no, definitely don't do that. I would probably, if it were me, I probably wouldn't. I would just do my homework and put in a number that I felt was reasonable. You're eventually going to have to get to that point anyway. They're going to, if you do get an interview, they're going to ask you for your salary expectations. So I think it's better to just kind of do your homework up front and know what you're going to say. Okay, so we talked about salary. Salary is not the only negotiable. There are certainly other parts of a compensation package that you can try to negotiate. Usually base salary is what you want to start with. It's the most, arguably the most important piece, and it's the piece that sticks with you, right? So you really only get one chance to negotiate your base salary. And whatever salary you come in at, that's what you're working with for the rest of your career at that company. However, if base salary is non-negotiable, other things that you could try to negotiate in terms of like monetary compensation include relocation stipends. So if you didn't get a package to help you relocate and you feel like you could use one, that's something you could ask for. Similarly is a signing bonus. Often companies have, very strict salary bands, so they're not able to go outside of a certain number for your base salary. But with signing bonuses, it's a little more flexible because it's a one-time payment. If it's a small company, maybe they're willing to offer options. Even some larger companies will offer stock as part of the package. That's certainly something that you could try to negotiate. You could negotiate the number of options. You could try to negotiate when those options vest, meaning, when they're actually yours. So that's probably something that's a little more sophisticated in terms of how you would have that conversation. And so I would recommend talking to your career consultant if you do want to try to negotiate that piece of the package. And then maybe there are things that have nothing to do with money that you just want to try to negotiate. It's if they're asking you to start on June 1st and you have a vacation coming up on June 15th, it's perfectly fine to ask if you can start after your vacation. Similarly, if you have a really long vacation planned before you're eligible to take vacation, that's something that you want to tell them when you're in that offer stage. They're not going to rescind your offer for asking, and you're much less likely to upset somebody by being honest and upfront about any travel plans that you might have. Vacation time. In a really large company, it's usually not negotiable, only because you could see why that would create a lot of inequity if two people with the same job had very different vacation days. But in smaller companies and startup environments, often it is something that you can try to negotiate, especially if you have a legitimate reason for needing more vacation. So all of these things, if they're important to you and they're things that you value, they're worth having a conversation over. The worst that can happen is someone's going to say no, sorry, and at least you know that you tried.
Kristen, another question that came in that I think that we should touch on now. Could
Yeah.
you negotiate internship offers?
You can, yeah. Again, I mean, the same rules apply, right? So you'll need to have a reason for negotiating. That reason might involve the skills that you could bring to the table. It might involve the cost of living, of taking an internship in a certain city. It could be that you know somebody who's interning for a similar company in a similar city that's getting paid $25 an hour. It could be that you have a competing offer. These are all perfectly legitimate reasons to try to negotiate an internship. And they are negotiable. Not with every company, but some companies will negotiate for the right candidate.
And it is worth noting too that internships are more likely to be harder to negotiate for because you are going to be with them for such a short period of time. Also, companies are going to be much more strict about the budgetary limitations that they have in hiring interns, but it is still definitely worth it to ask to negotiate. Just don't be surprised if you do hear, oh, we don't negotiate for internships.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I'll say, this happens less often, I think, once you've started full time, but one thing that companies do frown on is when interns or employees share their salaries. If they were kind enough to negotiate with you in the first place, it's probably not a good idea to go around talking to other interns about what salary you're getting. I know you can go on Glassdoor and post things anonymously, but I think if a company gave you the courtesy of negotiating with you, that kind of respecting that level of confidentiality is the polite thing to do.
Thanks, Kristen.
Sure. All right. So getting into the nitty gritty of how exactly do I have this negotiation conversation. I'm going to put a link in the chat. Can I do that? Can you do that for me, Kaden?
I just said that. Yep.
Okay. So this is a handout. I'll pop out and show it to you. That we put together to really help you with what exactly to say, whether it's in a conversation or an email. Keeping in mind when employers make an offer, the things that they're considering are, number one, the market. So, what is the average across the market for this particular position? Two, what are our current employees making? So, if you have employees who've been with the company for 2 years, it's really, kind of unfair to make an offer to someone who's just coming in at a salary that's a lot higher than the people who have already been there. And that's kind of why companies have what these things called salary bands, where for each position they have to stay within a certain salary band just to keep things fair. And then 3, they're considering your qualifications. So let's look at this handout for a second. No, that's not it. That's it. Okay. So this is the negotiation process. We went through a lot of this with you, so I'm not going to repeat everything, but in case you need to refer to it, we have the ethical responsibilities that Kaden referred to, the tools that you can use in the negotiation process when you're evaluating your terms. And then 3, here's some language that you can use. So if you're going to accept the offer as is, great, easy, done. Maybe you ask some follow-up questions about next steps or when should I report to work. Some language about negotiating the offer. So this is what we call the sandwich technique. So I'm really excited about this position. Always start with a positive. Then you want to kind of sandwich in your ask. And then kind of end it again with, I'm really hopeful about becoming a part of this team. I feel like this could be a great fit for me. All right, and then another part of the offer that is very frequently negotiated is the timeline for making a decision. As Kaden talked about earlier in our presentation, CMU does have a policy, so we try to help you out as much as we can with this. Employers are notorious for kind of not following the policy, especially on that first initial offer. So definitely don't be afraid to try to negotiate for a deadline that fits in with the policy that CMU has. And it's very simple. I mean, you can send an email to your recruiter referencing the policy, link to the policy in your email, and ask if you might be able to have an extra, whatever it is, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And again, if they say no, then we're here to help you. We're here to back you up. It doesn't hurt to ask. And then scenario 4, declining the offer. This is also something that you will kind of want to use tact when you're doing. Companies take a lot of time to make an offer. They get excited about having you as a candidate. So it's always polite to decline, within a fairly reasonable time frame, especially if you don't want to take that offer, so that they can go on and try and find someone else. Thank them for their time. You never know when you may want to consider that company again. You never know where that recruiter might end up later. So you don't want to burn any bridges when you're declining an offer either. And then I do talk to students who feel really unsure about whether it's even okay to negotiate. They're afraid that, an offer is just going to be rescinded if they ask for more money or if they ask for a different deadline. And I can tell you as a former recruiter that really almost never happens. Like something really egregious would have to take place for someone to, revoke an offer. So don't be afraid to have these negotiation conversations. They are very, very typical. All right.
But going and talking a little bit more about the importance of not burning bridges or getting on the wrong side of recruiters, we just also want to remind you that there is some terminology that we remind you to use when you are negotiating and others that we remind you not to use. So in terms of your professionalism, that is going to be the key to make sure that you are staying on the good graces and the good side of your recruiter. So again, emphasizing your importance and excitement about this opportunity and how important it is for you to move forward with it, asking if there is any flexibility and providing very strong examples. If you are very much in the line of you're going to want to accept this offer, but there's one thing stopping you, don't be afraid to say that outright. Just do it in a very polite manner. And you could always frame it as, I would be more comfortable if this thing, usually that's going to be around your salary, were closer to the average or closer to what it states I should be gaining in sort of my starting salary. you want to avoid things that are going to show comparison. So like saying, oh, well, my friend is working at Google and is making this much. Why am I not going to get this much? Or I want this thing so I can ... So that might look like I need to be able to make this amount of money so I can make sure I can go out to a restaurant twice a week. And then you also just ultimately, again, want to be as polite as possible. So rather than saying, can you give me this thing, just stating I would be more comfortable with, or I'm excited about this opportunity, but. So just make sure that the language that you are using is polite, upfront, and that you're not trying to create any discrepancies for what you're actually asking for and then what you ultimately need in order to make your decision around that offer. So when you are considering declining an offer, it's important to note that you need to turn that offer down by or before the deadline given. You do not want to wait until a couple of days or even a week afterward. That is just ultimately going to not put you into good graces with the recruiter. Whenever you're declining the offer, make sure that you are being grateful in your communication. So you're making sure that you're thanking that recruiter for their time and their effort in recruiting you. And make sure that you request to stay in touch as well. And you can either do that by keeping track of their email address or connecting with them on LinkedIn. If you want to decline via email, you can absolutely offer to speak with somebody via phone. In fact, recruiters might actually want to talk to you via phone anyway to get to hear a little bit more about what your reasoning was for declining the position in the first place and answering a couple of questions around what made you ultimately decline the candidacy at that specific company. Recruiters might also ask you to reconsider in that moment. So asking questions around, is there anything that we can do to make you reconsider? Or what was the thing that kind of tipped the scale for you to decide you don't want to pursue this opportunity? So you don't necessarily need to provide a straightforward answer of, oh, I've decided to take a role at this company instead, but definitely come prepared to justify a little bit of your reasoning why you decided not to take a position, whether that even comes down to just saying, I decided to take a little bit of a different route in my next steps of my career choice. So it's better for you to prepare for that rather than having to show up to a phone call and suddenly have to try to figure out how to justify your reasoning. But it just, at the end of the day, note that the decision you're making is, there's a reason for it, and feel confident in that reason being okay for you. But just ultimately note, it is never okay to ghost a company. So if somebody gives you an offer and you do not want to accept it, do not feel bad about sending that initial email or making that phone call. Just do not leave somebody in the dark about what your decision is, because at the end of the day, recruiters move around companies a lot, and you do not want to come across that person's name at another company, because that will essentially ruin your chances at that company before it has even started. So just, again, professionalism is key to making sure that you are staying in good graces with potential future employees or employers.
All right. So that's the end of our presentation, but we definitely wanted to allow sometimes for questions, because this is a pretty nuanced topic. So does anybody have something that they would like to ask or get clarification on?
You can ask that in the chat, you can ask it in the Q&A, or if you raise your hand, we can unmute you. It's always fun to wait for typing. What is a reasonable amount to negotiate for salary, percentage increase wise?
Well, I don't know that there's an exact percentage increase. You know, I think, again, it kind of depends on what data point you're using to negotiate. Typically, I would say somewhere between 5 and 10%. It also depends on like what number, what's your starting with. But 10% is somewhat high, I think. So between 5 and 10, I guess, would be a good average if you're looking for a percent. But if you were offered something and you thought it was really a low ball offer, maybe it was in a really expensive city, or it's nowhere close to the average that you're finding when you look up data on LinkedIn salary, then maybe you need to ask for a little bit more.
And above all else, if you want to ask for a good amount to negotiate for, try providing a actual like strict number for somebody to be able to work off of, because if there's any type of miscommunication, they might see something that's like 5% and you end up asking for that 5%, but then they misinterpret that. You just don't want that to get lost in translation, because it'll just continue to elongate the conversation in a way that's not going to be helpful. So if you could try to avoid using percentages in that negotiation speak, that's going to be preferred. But at the end of the day, just make sure that you're negotiating for something and you're giving that strong number. Question in the Q&A. Regarding the question on the last slide, are you able to share what company you are going to? Are there cases where someone would be explicitly disallowed from sharing that information with a recruiter? If yes, is there an example off the top of your head?
So it's really up to you if you want to share that information, unless you've signed a non-DA with a company, a non-disclosure agreement with a company where they specifically say, like, you can't tell anybody that you're going to be working here. That's really rare. I don't know that I've ever even seen that. So, I mean, unless they explicitly tell you that you can't divulge your place of employment until you actually start, then it's up to you whether you want to share the information with the recruiter. You don't have to. So if they ask if you're able to share, you can just say, I prefer not to. You could say, I'm going to a software company, but I'd rather not specify which one. If you're using, if you are still negotiating, sometimes it's helpful to share what company you're going to. If you say you're going to Google and they're a competitor, that may want them to get you on board even more. But if you're really certain that you're turning down the offer, then only share if you want
to. And like Kristen said, it's very rare for a company to say straight up that you are not allowed to say where you are going to work. But it's also worth noting that there's going to be a point where probably a recruiter is only asking that question because they're trying to figure out who their competitors are in the types of candidates that they're looking for. Also, recruiters will often keep track of potential candidates that they made offers to and then will decline because people will update their LinkedIn's, which is technically public information. So honestly, it's sometimes better to just say it outright to let them know where you're going. So again, that professionalism does stay strong. Another question. I'm applying for full-time, but I'm also considering doing a master's degree next year and a summer internship. Is it bad to apply for internships and full-time positions at the same company, or is there any other advice that you would have about this situation? That's a really good question, and we hear these types of conundrums a lot. Generally, what we would recommend is if you are still trying to figure out what your next steps might look like, it is okay to be looking for full-time opportunities and internships at the same time, but we would strongly discourage you from doing it at the same company. So what I would recommend ultimately would be is if you are applying to an internship at a company, you can absolutely let them know, here are some possible thoughts of like where your career might take you, some of the next steps that you're thinking about. And if there's a likelihood that an internship might be able to turn into a full-time role, if you are going to decide to defer going and getting a master's degree later on. It's also worth noting that this information should be clearly identified early on in the recruiting process, because the last thing that you would want to do is go all the way through for a full-time interview and then end up divulging as you're negotiating, oh, I'm actually only going to be staying in this position for 1 year, because that's just not going to look good for you to the recruiter that you're working with. So if it would be more comfortable for you to do so, absolutely let them know during your very first interview. So you're not wasting their time and they're not wasting your time by going all the way through that process. But at the end of the day, when you're applying to a company, you have to pick one or the other just to make sure different departments or different recruiters aren't being confused about why you're applying to both a 3-month internship opportunity and a full-time opportunity that can extend up to 5 or 6 years. These are all good questions, though. Any others that you all can think of? And if you want to ask them anonymously, you are able to do that in the Q&A. Just make sure that you click anonymous. Would Kristen mind going back to the slide that mentions using non-committal language? The one that says, "Thank you for sending me the offer. I will review the attached info."
Sure. Was that the handout?
I think that was actually the handout, yeah. I'm just going through the slideshow to make sure.
So this is the link that Kaden put in the chat.
It's on slide 6. It's the written offer communication strategy.
Okay.
Yeah, so that "thank you for sending the offer. I will review the attached information and follow up with any questions or concerns. I will provide my response by insert date here as indicated in the offer letter."
And we can post these slides to the handshake event afterwards.
All right. Any last minute questions?
I was gonna maybe put the video link in the chat as well. So we have a video that we were gonna show. I think it's a really nice way to put it all together. Let me see if I can pull this link out of. Actually, I don't know how to pull the link out. So when you get the slides in Handshake, you'll be able to play the video. But just know that it's there, and it's a nice sort of summary of everything that we've talked about.
Here's that link.
There we go. Thanks, Kaden.
Yeah, no problem. But you will be able to access this. We will post it to Handshake. And ultimately, if you have any other questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to, again, reach out to your specific college career consultant. We can definitely help you with more information that is tailored toward your specific situation. A lot of this advice is meant to be a little bit more generalized to match any type of industry that is currently possible for students to go into after Carnegie Mellon. So definitely let us know how we can help you. Oh, we have another question. How early in the hiring process can I tell one company about another deadline that I have? Oh, that's a good question. So one thing that we usually say is if you are in the midst of doing a lot of different interviews, you do not need to divulge that to a company until you have received some type of offer from them, whether that be a verbal or a written offer. So obviously, if you're going to be graduating soon, it's pretty assumptive that you are applying for full-time roles. So unless someone outright asks you, are you applying to other jobs or is this the only one? You don't need to divulge that information. But if you are specifically coming up on the possibility that you might have crossing deadlines and you are just starting a first round interview and you have an outstanding deadline for a full-time offer from another company, you can phrase it in terms of what their hiring time might look like. So asking the question around, what are the next rounds going to look like in terms of interviews and when might I be able to find out? The reason that I'm asking is because I have an offer that is outstanding, but this company's offer would be much more enticing to me. So I just want to make sure that the timelines will line up as much as possible. So all in all, focus it on the hiring timeline, not so much as you need to know which one you're going to pick in terms of offerings.
And don't forget to try to negotiate your deadline with the other company.
Exactly.
All right, well, these were great questions. Thank you all so much for your participation and for listening. And again, we hope to see you in a one-on-one appointment. Good luck with all of your interviewing and your offers and your negotiations. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.